This conference will now be recorded.
Now.
Good morning all, and welcome to this morning's workshop session on the new Code of Construction Product Information, referred to as the CCPI. This is a joint workshop hosted by LRWA and SPRA, and on behalf of both associations, thank you for taking the time to attend this morning. The session is also the second event in the SPRA Autumn series. Before we start, I would like to go over some important housekeeping issues concerning this morning's event. We won't do introductions, although you can see who is at the event if you click the people icon on your screen. Everyone will be muted to avoid background noise, but you can unmute yourself if you want to speak during questions. If you want to ask a question, please use the speech bubble on your screen to ask the question instead of interrupting the presenter. We will keep an eye on these for later on. We will work through any questions at the end of today's presentations. Also, please note that the event is being recorded this morning. I'd like to draw your attention to the following. SPRA and LRWA adhere strictly to the requirements of competition law. All members and others attending need to be aware of this and comply with these requirements. Members and others are forbidden from discussing competitively sensitive information, such as non-public strategic information about a business's commercial policy, future pricing, future outlook plans, etc. This is a closed-door meeting under the Chatham House rules. Today's presenters are perhaps well known to most of you. Apart from myself representing SPRA, the presenters will be Sarah Spink, the CEO of the Liquid Roofing and Waterproofing Association, and Matthew Sexton, Market Development and Technical Standards Director at the BMI Group, a member of both LRWA and SPRA. As a member of Working Group 12, Sarah participated in the development of the CCPI through the Marketing Integrity Group. Sarah was well suited to contribute, having had an extensive industry background as an experienced marketeer in the waterproofing sector. She was a product manager for liquid applied membranes prior to taking up her current position at the LRWA as CEO. Matthew also worked on the development of the CCPI on the Marketing Integrity Group. Matthew was invited onto the group due to his extensive knowledge in the area of code development. He continues to work in this area and participates in a number of influential committees and groups supporting the work of the Industry Response Group to the Hackett Review. We'll begin this morning when I will give some background to the CCPI, covering the reasons for the existence of the code in the first place. Sarah will then take us through the issues from her marketing perspective. These include a session on misleading product claims and the associated problems. This will hopefully clearly demonstrate the problem to all as highlighted by Hackett. Matthew will then present the overview of the CCPI, including detail of the 11 associated clauses, some guidance concerning the implementation of the code, and information relating to what manufacturers can do to prepare for the code as it is rolled out and available for all to sign up to in the coming months. Some may not be aware that the origin of the CCPI stems from the horrific Grenfell Tower tragedy in 2017, nearly 4.5 years ago. One of the most tragic events to shake the very foundation of this country that would result in an outcry from the public for government to investigate and ensure to the best of its ability that nothing like this would ever happen again. The impact of Grenfell would be and continues to be far-reaching. The facts were that on the 14th of June 2017, a massive fire engulfed the Grenfell Tower in London, resulting in a tragic loss of life of 72 deaths. Many more residents directly involved have been left with physical scars and suffering mental trauma. In some cases, that may never heal. The country shocked by the Grenfell Tower fire required answers as to why such a horrific event could happen here in the United Kingdom. Importantly, there was an immediate demand from the public for an inquiry, an investigation, to ensure that this could not happen again. The Grenfell Tower inquiry is still ongoing and has included testimony from construction product manufacturers and others involved in construction. The construction industry was clearly at the centre of the inquiries that would follow and are still ongoing. The government response was to investigate the building regulatory systems in place. Dame Judith Hackett was commissioned by the UK government to review building regulations and fire safety following the Grenfell Tower fire. The Government Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick, in October 2019, commented on the appointment of Dame Judith, saying, "A respected expert in building safety, Dame Judith Hackett will provide independent advice to the government on how best to establish a powerful new building safety regulator." Dame Judith published her independent review of building regulations and fire safety in May 2018, and the government committed to take forward all of her recommendations. At that point, this was an indicator of what was to happen in the months and years to come concerning safety in buildings. The government response to the Grenfell tragedy clearly centred around the Hackett Review and the recommendations made in it by Dame Judith and her team. These were all to be accepted by government. Recommendation 7.1b and 7.1c became central to the eventual development of the CCPI. What is evident here is that the Hackett Review recommendation 7.1b puts the onus on product manufacturers to make clear statements on what systems products can, and very importantly, cannot be used for. Testing scope, application of products and systems, and the resulting implications must be more clearly communicated in plain, consistent, non-technical language. This draws in not only technical departments, but importantly also sales and marketing departments of a manufacturer's organization. The resulting response from industry must be for all departments of a manufacturer's organization to meet the Hackett recommendation. Another key element of the government response following the recommendation of Hackett was to appoint a building safety regulator. The Building Safety Bill, introduced to Parliament during the summer this year, will provide the legal framework for reform that will directly affect construction product manufacturers and their supply chains. The appointment of a building safety regulator through the HSE is at the centre of this proposed legislation. The building safety regulator will have three main functions. One, overseeing the safety and performance of buildings, helping and encouraging the built environment industry and building control professionals to improve their competence, and leading implementation of new regulatory framework for high-rise buildings. A new regulatory regime for construction products will therefore be established. The construction industry was given an opportunity to respond to the Hackett Review and the subsequent recommendations. This resulted in the formation of the Industry Response Group and setting up the Steering Group on Competence for Building a Safer Future, also known as the Competence Steering Group, or the CSG. This group brought together more than 150 organizations from across the construction, built environment, fire safety, owner and building management sectors. Emanating from this group were 13 working groups, 0 to 12. These groups continue to deal with the competence required of those procuring, designing, constructing, inspecting, assessing, managing, and maintaining buildings. The industry response to the Hackett Review continues through the work of the working group structure, and specifically in terms of products through Working Group 12. The scope of Working Group 12 covers the competence required for interactions with all construction products that are a fixed part of completed assets. WG12 establishes the qualities needed for the competent selection and implementation of products throughout an asset's life. Emanating from WG12 and in response to Chapter 7 of the Hackett Review, the CPA established the Marketing Integrity Group, the MIG. This was a group of marketing and technical experts from industry, government, and trade bodies. The group was tasked with eliminating misleading information and disingenuous marketing practices. As a balanced approach, the MIG, in conjunction with the NBS, launched a call for evidence on construction products information with a survey in 2019. The results were published as an initial findings document. Based on these initial findings, the MIG launched an industry-wide consultation into a new proposed code for construction product information named the CCPI. In September this year, the Code for Construction Product Information was published. A new company, Construction Product Information Limited, a not-for-profit organization with independent governance and management through the Considerate Constructor Scheme, has now been set up to administer the CCPI. Organizations can register their interest now to receive updates ahead of the launch of registration for verification towards the end of this year. So therefore, the CCPI was developed by the Marketing Integrity Group after 2 years of work, including industry consultation. Work in developing the CCPI is in direct response to the recommendation by Hackett concerning the communication of construction product information. The need for the CCPI is therefore absolutely clear, and our associations representing our members have been at the center of the work to provide clear, accurate, up-to-date, accessible, and unambiguous information concerning the products and their products as part of systems. The CCPI is a code for manufacturers to sign up to that gives specifiers and all involved in our industry confidence in the product information supplied. So that's the background to the CCPI. I would now like to hand over to Sarah, who will take us through the issues from her marketing perspective. These highlight misleading product claims and the associated problems. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Yeah, this is the fun section, in the sense of you get to see my perspective of what some of the problems can be with misleading product claims. So in the MIG committee, we talked a lot about misleading terminology when it comes to describing what construction products can do. So I've just pulled out a few examples using logos to describe why it's a use the logos in the way that they have been used, just to highlight what the issue really is. Okay, so this one, a warranty logo, they are used commonly, and we do see products that appear in a tin where quite literally you've got 100-year guarantee, 50-year guarantee. What's wrong with this? Why is it seen to be misleading? Why was it judged to be misleading? Well, firstly, who is offering the warranty? There's not enough information. Who is offering the warranty? How financially secure are they? Will they be here in 50 years' time? What are they offering a warranty on? Is it product? Is it installation? What exactly is it? Would the product system last for 50 years? Where's the proof? So some products haven't been in the market for 50 years. So how do they know it's going to last for 50-year tests for roofing products, for example? The highest we can go is 25 for sure. So what exactly is it offering? Is this misleading to the customer, I ask you? It was deemed that this would be misleading to the customer. Another one, I've seen this one on liquid products, no members, thank God, but literally CE mark approved. What does this actually mean? Because CE marking is not a test house, it's not a body that approves products. So it literally, CE marking confirms that the product can be sold across Europe because it conforms with the needs of Europe. It's not an approval. So that is completely misleading. This one, fire, obviously came up quite a lot in the Marketing Integrity Group. We have a lot of fire associations there who know their stuff. And these two were deemed they should be banned. Fireproof, fire retardant, there's no measurable criteria. I will take the Fire Association's advice on that. Fire retardant is still currently used on BBA certificates, apparently, so they were quite sore on that one, because I don't believe it should be. And fire retardants are an additive to a product, not a performance level. So is this misleading to the customer? It was deemed that it is. It's highly misleading, and the official terms should be used. So we should be more prescriptive, non-combustible or limited combustible where appropriate. So you can see that we've got to be very careful with our language moving forward. Just to add this into the mix, there's a lot of eco-friendly product. And what does that actually mean? There's not enough information to back up some of the claims that are being made. And this is quite literally greenwash. In isolation, eco-friendly means absolutely nothing. Substantiate with figures based upon recognizable standards. That was what the MIG found. So for example, use EPDs or LCAs to show what you're actually meaning. But a lot of these standards that your products tested against, they don't say whether something's an eco-friendly product or not. It's just a way to be able to compare one product with another. So is this misleading to a customer? I would say so. So there are a whole host of green terms that were put onto the questionable list with the MIG. So my thoughts as to why misleading product claims can happen. So I put this picture in because I have done this job. I did this job. I've worked in marketing teams. I was a product manager. And I don't believe that people willfully go to work and want to mislead customers. I don't believe that. I think there are reasons why misleading product claims can creep into literature. And these are just my thoughts. It's not casting aspersions on any manufacturer at all. It's just literally my thoughts from my experiences. So I think that you can get misleading product claims because it's historical. So so a lot of marketers, when I first started in marketing, I'd never been in in my job in 2006 in liquids, I'd never been in construction before. And so when I was asked to update a brochure, I would literally take the previous brochure and just update it from an aesthetic point of view or add new information in. I would not necessarily question the validity of the existing information. So you believe that what was put there originally is still true and current until you're told differently. So it's just something to think about, that a lot of our current literature does need to be looked at. Inexperience and lack of technical sign-off. So go back to when I first started in this industry, if the technical staff were busy and you had deadlines that you needed to hit, it kind of the importance of checking off the literature, which is quite an intensive job, might fall to the bottom of the list when the technical team have things like specifications they've got to be getting on with. And not everybody is big enough to have product managers where it's your job specifically to look after the product claims, the testing kit, make everything up to date. Okay, so lack of understanding of test data versus assessments. So again, there's this misunderstanding or lack of education as to what actually is test data and what can be referred to versus what is an assessment. So Matthew will be going into that in more detail in the next section. Time pressures, as I've already said, we all worked for commercial entities where, you know, sometimes the priority is to get the specs out the door, get the projects secured, as opposed to checking literature, which can take a long time. Relying too much on supplier information without questioning their claims. So if you're buying in products, you are presuming that the supplier has updated and is on top of their own literature. That is quite a big presumption, which I think in Grenfell has kind of come through, that, for example, distributors hadn't updated some of their literature in line with the manufacturers, and you've got to question your suppliers constantly. Is this up to date? And if you don't understand something, or they're referring to tests, you're within your rights to ask to see that test work. Okay, general lack of awareness of the implications should product claims be found to be inaccurate. I think we can safely say that has changed. I think people are now aware of what can happen should their product claims be found to be invalid. And I think it's focused the mind. The other thing I would say is company culture, and this was discussed a lot in CCPI and MIG. So sales orientated companies versus technically orientated companies. Sometimes again there is this pressure from management, from the higher levels of the company, that it's all about sales, it's all about sales, it doesn't matter. It does matter, and the MDs need to, again, following Grenfell, their minds should be focused, but the technical people shouldn't be overruled should they believe that something is not right. Okay, so it's a whole culture change that we're going through, and the introduction of CCPI is aiming to tackle all of these issues. Okay, so I'm going to hand you on to Matthew, who's going to go through the details of CCPI.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ronan. Morning, everybody. So yeah, we'll start with a bit of an overview as to what does signing up to the code really mean. The code says that manufacturers of construction products who choose to sign up to the code are agreeing to abide by the clauses in the code. And we'll go through the 11 clauses and we'll go through some of them in greater detail, because some of them I believe are obvious or clearly expressed and clearly identifiable as what's required. But what I would say is the code is downloadable. Go onto the website, download the code, go through it in detail and understand it from your business perspective. But it's also goes on to say it's about giving confidence. And Grenfell has knocked the sector and the public reputation of construction product manufacturers. I don't think anybody can dispute that. From the testimonies I've seen of the construction product manufacturers, serious questions have been asked and manufacturers have struggled to give convincing answers to them in many cases. And it's that supply chain. And I'm going to come on to the supply chain, because to me, the supply chain is everybody involved in construction. That's from clients to specifiers and everybody in between, installers, main contractors, every part of the supply chain, everybody involved in a construction product relies upon literature and information provided at different stages, from concept specifications through to maintenance during occupation. You know, it's this Dame Judith Hackett concept of the golden thread, and the fact that that threads all the way through the life of the building, and the information's got to be available It's got to be accurate, accessible, up to date, clear and unambiguous at every stage to all the different people who are going to use it, whether it's an architect, an installer, or a facilities manager. Yeah, sorry, next slide, please. So what's defined as construction product information? And this, if I'm being really honest, I would have preferred that the code had given a little bit more clarity here, because it sets out what is included but is not limited to its definition of product information, i.e. it's for you to decide what is it defined in it, but it says that it is not limited to anything given in writing, in print, online, electronically, or in an advertisement. And it's what that is being done in terms of given us and is accessible to internal and external stakeholders. So that doesn't mean that means it covers, in my mind, everything from anything that you give to a member of your company or to an outside party. So that is going to cover, in my mind, including presentations given by the sales team, CPDs, everything, as well as actual literature. So we've got to look at this in the broadest sense. Okay, next slide. Okay, so if we go on to the clauses themselves, well, they've broken the clauses up into sections. So the first section is information creation. And there's 3 clauses here. A manufacturer must have in place a documented sign-off process for creating product information. So they've got to have physical evidence of how they go about signing off. A manufacturer must have in place a formal version control process for all product information. If you look over to the right, you'll see here an example of a unique hierarchical number with a date and a version number, so that in this instance, you can clearly trace what version of the document sits in front of you and whether it's the current and up-to-date version. And I've been in many meetings where it's become apparent that different people have got different versions of a document in front of them. And it can, in one side you can say it's comical, but on the other side it's actually frightening. People have a responsibility to make sure they've got the current version, but they can only do that if there's a way for them to be clear that they've got the current version and if it's accessible to them. So we need the code and we need accessibility. In a modern age, you know, the internet is there. Websites are the way forward as far as I'm concerned. It's where people, certainly people younger than me, go to get all their information. You know, people don't necessarily go to a library, you know, to get information now. They go on the internet. Okay, a manufacturer must not use misleading or ambiguous wording, phrasing, or imagery, and must embrace the use of plain English to ensure accurate representation of product information and performance claims. I think that's clear, and Sarah's very much touched on that with some of her references as to where things have been misleading. People use logos and use imagery in particular, in my experience, in a way that could confuse people. I remember during the working group work, there was one example that people kept coming back to, and it was about the use of sealants, fire retardant sealants, where it says in all the advertising, it said on the tube, can provide up to 3 hours performance. But when you looked into the detail, the 3 hours was in very specific circumstances. And there were many other circumstances where it only achieved half an hour. But their claim of up to 3 hours could therefore be seen as causing confusion. Next slide. Okay, so we're now on to what they call the core information clauses, clauses 5 to 7. And we're going to come back to 4, 5, and 7 in more detail. But yeah, 4 says a manufacturer must provide valid and demonstrable documentation where claiming compliance to or achievement of any certification, classification, or industry standard. So this is about test reports, about classification reports. But I'll come on and particularly talk about and try and explain the difference between certification, classification, or industry standards. But again, this is very clearly set out in the code. So if you're not sure, go back to the code, read it, and reread it. And if you're still not sure, then speak to somebody more senior with you in your own organization or contact one of the trade associations to get help. A manufacturer must provide specific documentation when making any product performance claims which are outside of certification, classification, or industry standards. So this is saying if you're not operating under clause 4, you've got to be really clear. But again, we will come back to that afterwards. And the thing here you've got to be clearest about is that you don't have a certification, classification, or industry standard report that fully supports your claim, whatever you're making. So clause 6, a manufacturer must make available on their web page the descriptive and physical characteristics of the construction product. So again here, a really simple one. It's about, its weight, its thickness, its length, all those basic things. Very easy to put into a data sheet, but can be not kept up to date, not kept accurately. So clause 7, ensure product information is consistent with manufacturer's supplied product. So that what they're buying today or what you're sending them today is the same as what is described and quoted in the product information, so that there's no risk that they're getting a different performance to what is in the literature. This is one that Grenfell, the Grenfell inquiry, has criticised heavily certain key players of misleading people and third-party certification organisations by not keeping their literature, particularly their certification claims, up to date. Next slide. Okay, clause 8. A manufacturer must publish its website and make easily accessible on their webpage clear product information on handling, installation, operation, maintenance, and disposal of construction products. So it's about giving the user the ability to understand how and what to do with it. And clause 9, when making any claims of guarantees and or warranties, and in this instance, the code explains that guarantees and warranties are seen as interchangeable by many people. There's even confusion as to what people are referring to, whether it's a guarantee or warranty. So I wouldn't get too worried about which word you want to use or are using. They are the same thing, effectively. Okay. Now, this about the guarantees, this is, it says the guarantees and warranties should be transparent and in a format recognized by the relevant sector of industry. This is something that we as a sector have got to work on to develop, but there are some good examples in other sectors, particularly in the insurance sector, of how to set out these kind of documents. This isn't a document or it's not an area to get into the fine detail. It's not about the absolute T's and C's of a guarantee. This is about just explaining in clear English what's required, but we'll come on to that a bit later again. So next slide, please. Okay, so the last two clauses, clauses 10 and 11. Clause 10, a manufacturer must ensure that their technical helpline contact details, telephone and or email, are visible and accessible on their web page. I think we're talking about here that they're saying that these contact details don't need to be on every page, but you should be able to get to those contact details within a couple of clicks, because people need to know how to get to people, and it needs to be there in really clear, simple terms for them to know who to contact. It's a bit like we've taken a recent decision as BMI to change the contact details on all our BBA certificates, because they were our general head office contact details and general phone number. And we took a decision that, based on talking with our customers and talking with the BBA, that probably 95% plus of people who are reading a BBA certificate, if they had a question, it was going to be of a technical nature. And therefore, let's get them directly, as quickly and efficiently as possible, to the right people to answer their question, not speaking to the receptionist at head office and having to then be redirected. Right, and then number 11, and this is about competence. A manufacturer must have in place a robust training program for new and existing personnel. So everybody, not just newcomers to the business, to ensure that anyone conveying product information is competent to the level of knowledge required for their role. So we'll come back to that one in a bit more detail, but I think it's really quite clear what's needed. Right, so we'll go through what I've described as the complex clauses in a bit more detail now. So clause 4. Next slide. Okay, so certification. I don't intend to read this all out to you. It's a detailed paragraph, but effectively what this is saying is that certification has to come, and be backed by a third-party organization such as the BBA, who are accredited to ISO 17065 by a national accreditation body such as UCAS. And I say such as UCAS because UCAS is the accreditation body in the UK, but if you look at the test report front page that I put there on the slide, slightly probably difficult to see, but in the bottom right-hand corner is the Belgium certification body. So they are the equivalent to UCAS in Belgium. So these are the kind of things that when you're looking at reports, you need to be looking for, that this is backed by a certification body, and that the test body that's done the work is accredited to the standard that you're testing to. Okay, it can cover CA marking where appropriate. A certificate must be publicly available on your web page, and/or the certificate number and provider must be stated for a third party to check. You've got to make these things accessible. You've got to allow people to have access to it where appropriate. Next slide. So classification. Classification is it's confirmation of a level of performance based on test reports. So your test report is certification, and your classification report that may take a range of test reports and bring that data together and present a system performance across a range of areas. So for example, it may look at different thicknesses of insulation, different pitches and slopes, different areas, but it's all brought together. All the relevant test data is brought together by the certification body. So in the instance I give you here, the classification report that I give you is written by Warrington Fire. So Warrington Fire have access to all the test reports and documentation, and it enables them to write the classification report stating what performance is. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what's the difference between certification, classification, or industry standard? This seems to be one that debates everybody. I think certification and classification, I hope I've explained it, that you understand the difference between the two. But industry standard seems to be one that puzzles some people. And it is one that probably is more relevant in some ways to other sectors, where there are specific test methods that have been developed by trade associations or other certification bodies such as the BBA that aren't covered by a harmonized standard or a designated standard, but they are written down, they are recorded, they're publicly available, and they're publicly accessible. From our perspective, the example I have given here is Appendix B of Approved Document B, because Appendix B sets out how to carry out an assessment in lieu of testing, I'm going to call it. So where you don't have a direct test report or a direct classification report for what you're proposing to do, but you have a body of significant evidence that, if you follow the guidance and the rules set out in Appendix B, allows you to believe that it is actually correct and accurate and a valid claim. Now, I wouldn't take this lightheartedly, doing an assessment in accordance with Appendix B. I think you've got to make sure that you've got the right technical skills within your team to do that, and that you've got access to the right level of data. Because as Appendix B says, this cannot just be an opinion. This has to be based on evidence. So it's got to be based on test reports. It can't just be a good idea that you came up with in the pub one Friday evening to say, let's make this claim. It's got to be based on evidence, and you've got to make it clear to people that this is how you've arrived at the performance claim. Okay, next slide. So yeah, so I give you the example here: certification, roofing systems which are tested to TS 1187 test 4, that's certification. Classification would be a roofing system that's classified in accordance with EN 13501 Part 5. So it will be based on the certified tests, but it's a classification report. And the advantage of a classification report, or one of the perceived advantages of a classification report, is it doesn't go into the level of detail that a test report does. It summarizes all the test reports that are reviewed by the body that's written the classification report, and you can't write it as a manufacturer. It has to be done by the certification body, but that they record all the test reports that they've reviewed and summarize in that classification report. So it's a good way, and it's an advantage that we have as a roofing sector, because the classification report system is not available to all construction products. There are many construction products that only have certification. They don't have the access to classification. And then, yeah, industry standard, the roofing system has been assessed in accordance with the principles established in Annex B of Approved Document B, and believe, if tested in accordance with TS 1187 test 4, to achieve a classification of B roof T4. So I'm summarizing there what I see as what an industry standard. We're following an industry standard, and in the longer document would make clear all the evidence that you'd used to do that assessment and who had been involved. Next slide. So clause 5, a manufacturer must provide specific documentation when making any product performance claims which are outside of certification, classification, or industry standard tests. So this is the, should we say, where you don't conform with the standards. So this to me is where you may write a letter, for example, to a customer or to an architect, a specifier, setting out your opinion. Yeah, the opinion still has to be backed by valid test data, and it must make it clear that it's an assessment. So it can't mislead people to think that they're seeing a test report. They've got to understand, you've got to make it clear to them it's a technical assessment. And where the test is referenced, it must state what was tested, the date that it passed the test, to what standard, and by whom was it last reviewed to ensure it's still a valid test. Okay, it must show what the stated performance data was clear as to whether it's based on calculated or test performance, and manufacturers must clearly state where tests are laboratory tests. So if you do a in-house test or a back of the out sort of on-site test, or a very sort of non-certified, non-approved test, then you've got to make it clear. It may still be valid information, but you've got to make it clear to people what you're basing your opinion on. You've also got to talk about the specific properties relevant to the intended application, so make it clear whether you're talking about structural issues or fire or acoustic or thermal, or what the performance is. Not just put lots of information together that may be very interesting, but it's totally irrelevant to the topic of what you're assessing. Be specific to the intended application. Where known, provide examples of limitations or inappropriate applications. So if you're making it specifically for a specific use or a specific set of conditions, tell people that, make it clear where they can't use it as much as where they can use it. Next slide. Yeah, so this is an engineering judgment, I'm going to call it. It's it's not currently possible to test a build-up of for all overlay scenarios. Therefore, an assessment has to be done based on experience and relevant test evidence. So the manufacturer's got to provide the nearest system that they've tested, but they also need to, in my opinion, add a clause to state that the assessment should not replace the need for seeking approval from the principal designer for the project or the relevant building control authority. So we need to make sure that where you're assessing, expressing an opinion, that the relevant people are confirming they are happy and comfortable with that assessment. Next slide. Right, a documented process ensuring all changes affecting product information resulting from changes to the construction product are identified and reflected in revised product information. So I think this can be summarized to say this is about if you change your product, if operations, if your manufacturing process, so if raw materials change, the process changes, or anything changes in the manufacturing element that could affect the performance of the product, then you've got to review that against your literature. This again is one that's come out heavily criticised in the Grenfell inquiry as to a lack of this. Now, from my perspective, we have a substantial number of products that are covered by BBA certificates, and all BBA certificates include what's called an AQP, an actual quality plan. So the actual quality plan is the agreement between the manufacturing plant and the BBA as to within what constraints, what parameters will they manufacture the product. So, for example, it will say a range of raw materials. So, it might show 2 or 3 different sources of bitumen from different refineries. And as long as you stick within those defined parameters, then you're within your actual quality plan. But if you want to change to a different source of bitumen, you actually need and are required to ask the BBA for approval before you make the change. So not after the change, before you make the change. So this is going to require, a internal process, and it's going to be wider than marketing, wider than technical probably. It's going to need manufacturing operations. They are the people who, certainly in our business, who phone me up and say, we've got a problem with supplier X or whatever, can we change to this? How do we change to this? And then we go into a formal review process. And we look at that and say, can it be done? Are we within all of our certifications? Is there any impact on our claims? Do we need to do any further testing? Right, next slide. So clause 9, when making any claim or guarantee or warranty, the manufacturer's webpage must state what is covered, excluded, and required to comply with its terms. The guarantee should be transparent in the format recognized by the relevant sector of industry. Next slide. So what is covered? Who's offering the guarantee? How is it underwritten? Is there an insurance company involved? Is there a parent company that's offering a collateral warranty to this? These are the things that people need to know. What does it cover? So does it just cover product, system? These things need to be clear. And you may have different levels of guarantee depending on various factors, but this needs to be explained to the customer and to the reader. Who benefits from it? Is it tied to the building? Is it tied to the installer? Is it tied to the construction company that contractually built the building? These are the kind of things that you've got to be clear about. What's the value or nature of the cover? So is it what I call a sliding cover, so that over time the maximum amount of claim diminishes, or can you make the same level of claim throughout the life of the building? Is the guarantee transferable? So can you move it from building owner to a building owner if the building's sold and move hands? Next slide. So what is excluded? What's not covered? And that might be installation, it might be design. What functions or performances are expressly excluded? So this might be, where you've got plant on the roof, where the plant itself damages the surface. Next slide. Yeah, and what's required to comply with terms? So you might simply say that care and maintenance must be carried out in accordance with BS 6229 2018, or you might have a long list of requirements that you say. How often do you want the roof inspected? Who's got to be present at the inspection? Who's got to authorize maintenance? Who has to do the maintenance? What would invalidate the guarantee? So what would you, if you did something without asking the manufacturer who's underwriting this guarantee, what would mean that the guarantee is no longer valid? People need to know and want to know this up front. Next slide. So there's a quick example of simple, clear, not long-winded examples on our website of 2 different levels of guarantee. So one's a system guarantee on the left, product guarantee on the right. Don't get me wrong, there's a detailed pages of T's and C's that go with this, but this gives a customer a quick, clear insight into what the main principal terms are. Next slide. Clause 11, a manufacturer must have in place robust training program for new and existing personnel. So even I have, and people who've been in industry for many more years than me need to be going through this training program. And it needs to cover everybody who is conveying product information. So whether that's technical, sales, marketing, everybody. Even the MD, if he likes to talk about products. So the minimum requirements are, you've got to define a knowledge and competency matrix for all roles that are involved with product information, including customer-facing roles. Show evidence of the maintained training and qualifications register. Now, to me, this means you've got to test people. This has to be something where you can potentially show an auditor a copy of the material that somebody's been trained in, and then the test to demonstrate their competence in this area. Okay, next slide. So yeah, a skills matrix. I think this is a great way to, and I've just put this up as a bit of an example. It's a template, but you've got to have something like this for all the people involved. It's got to clearly demonstrate their capability and what that capability covers, but also you've got to educate people in what they can't say, because it's as important that they know what they can say as what they can't say. So, and there needs to be a structure that says who to go to when they get to an area where they can't say, give an answer to a question. Next slide. Okay, so the code is out there. You can register now to express your interest. The registration for verification will open very shortly, at some point next month, is my understanding. And the code is now really being handed over by WG12 and the CPA to CCPI. It's for construction product information to run, because we have to, the code has to have, or its verification processes have to have integrity and independence. So there are, go to the website of CCPI and download the documents. Next slide. Things I would say to manufacturers that I would recommend that you do is bring this to the attention of the MD and the senior management team. Don't think as a marketing person that you're stuck with this and all the weight is on your shoulders, or as a technical person, you really do need to bring this to the attention of the highest level in your business. You need to review the code and guidance document. So download them, read them, talk to people about them, ask people questions, and review your procedures against the code. So look at your current procedures and understand, do you think they're code compliant? And assemble a project team to work on what needs to happen. And I think that will be a cross-functional team, probably not just marketing. And set a realistic time frame with regular reviews and updates to the management team. And really from the beginning, consider what is the right time to start your application process, because this is something that's being led by industry. But I'll be frank with you that if take-up doesn't happen in significant numbers, then I expect government to take further action in the form of regulation or some other mandatory process. Okay, I think that's my last slide. So Thank you for your time, and any questions?
No, there's none on the chat, but there is a comment from Nigel just to say the code will be open in January by appointment to those manufacturers that took early interest and pledged to the code.
Okay, so thank you, Nigel, for a latest update, because when I spoke to CPI only 2 weeks ago, they were saying that it was going to be open in December. But I appreciate that that they're learning as they go through this as much as we are. And we all know that when you're learning about these things, it's probably never quite as simple as you first thought.
The reality is, Matthew, is December is only a 2-week month, and in the end, marketing and what have you in December is lost. So I sort of like I asked them why is it they were hell bent to do it in this December, and I'm not saying my lobbying totally worked, but in the end they did come back and say, look, we've decided from a marketing cycle point of view to kick off the new year. The important point is if you attended one of those seminars, they ran about 3 of them a few weeks back. If you attended one of those and you've pledged, I pledged to the allegiance of, they would be the first ones they would approach. And the reason being is the fact that they have to scale up their team to either the avalanche of people that come forward or not. So they're trying to just manage to start with. So that's the reason why they've done that.
I have noticed that they've been advertising for assessors, looking for people to join their team to cover the broad range of experience that they're going to need.
Yeah, and obviously, sorry, I was going to answer the Mark's question was about the money is the fact that they keep putting it off to tell us. There's all of my dealings with them. They always from the outset kept sort of like heading me off on the price, and I said I don't want to know what the price is. It'll be what it'll be. So they still haven't said. But what you can be assured of is that the more manpower it takes, the more expensive it will be. So if you've got more product sets, well, of course, it'll be more expensive. That's probably logical. But they are going to use technology to do some of the sleuthing of this. And the more that they can do of that, then the less it will be. But I think it's this week that they're now supposed to be announcing the costs.
Yeah, and they are, as I understand it, they are looking at the level of safety performance of your product, shall we say, as to there'll be different grades potentially as to where you fall into based on your product.
Yeah, and I think we could establish that roofing materials are not safety critical in the terms that they've been talking about.
No, agreed.
Okay.
All right. Any more questions, Sarah?
No, that's it on the chat. Okay, so
Sarah, sorry, there's a couple just come in that I can see, and one is from Leon asking, for those who didn't take early interest and pledge to the code, when will you be able to register? I think.
Well, they haven't said exactly where. I mean, in the end, it won't stop you registering. It's just when they will allow you to move forward. So I wouldn't let it stop you trying to get through and be persistent. So that would be my advice.
I think my personal opinion here, Ronan, is it depends. They don't want to be hit by an avalanche, if that makes sense, and that will only cause us as manufacturers a problem, because you don't want to be sitting in a queue for months and months waiting to be processed. But until they open registration, they don't know, is this going to be a trickle or a tidal wave?
Yeah,
it's a chicken and egg one again.
And also, to start with, let's face it, they're all going to be learning. I mean, they've been learning through the pilot phase, and they're still going to be learning because, as Matthew just explained, they're looking to employ new people, so they have to be briefed on it. But I think the level of what they're assessing and checking is perhaps a lot further, is people think is a lot further than it is. It's like I know an ISO 9000 audit. The guy that comes and audits doesn't have any knowledge of your business, he doesn't need to. He reads what he's auditing, and it's very similar here. Is they're not going to have any level of knowledge about your systems. They apply their auditor's logic to the task.
Indeed. Yeah.
Are there any more, Ronan?
No, no more that I can see. I think I think Nigel gave an answer to Mark's question. Martin has just come forward. Martin Bidwell from Moy. I assume there are no set deadlines for this at this stage. I think Martin's referring to the timing, I would imagine, of the sign up.
I think, well, I would interpret Martin's question and say this is not a mandatory code. This is a voluntary code, and therefore you don't have to have registered or start by a set date. But as I've stated, government is going to be watching this with a close view, and they want to see people sign up to it. And if people aren't signing up to it, or it's not making the progress that they want, then I expect them to take further action.
Yeah, I think we can further add to that is there are a number of industries were asked how long they might reasonably take to get through this, and the answer was maybe a few years. So that's, I think everybody sees that you can't get everybody through it all at once. So but also is the fact that how long might it actually take to do was, I mean, if you fully commit to it and what have you, it's probably I don't know, maybe a couple of months. I would guess you could probably do it quicker if you really committed to it, but they reasonably expected it might take a minimum of 2 months. I think they're expecting the first approvals perhaps March, April time if they start in January.
The biggest bit of this will be the marketing teams, the sales teams looking at all the literature and doing an audit, doing a self audit. And you could start that now just to see where you're at with regards to it. Do you comply at the moment? What work is needed to comply? And it'll be more than others. As in, some people might not have looked at the literature in a long time. So just that bit you don't need to have registered to do, and I would recommend that you start looking at your own company literature now.
I'd also highlight that, as far as I'm concerned, that there are a number of I'll call them tier 1 contractors and others who are senior in the supply chain who have indicated that they are likely to add this to as a requirement as part of their pre-certification of use of products, and there's government being included on this. Government has less historical success in making that work, but they are indicating that they might be inclined to set this as a criteria for use of products on projects.
There's no denying it's a commercial driver, is the fact that you'll be missed out from tenders in due course if it is you haven't got it. And it's something that we as SPRA and LRWA need to get behind, and therefore we should make it a requirement for manufacturers to comply. We're not necessarily setting a date for it, but there should be an intent to do it, I would suggest.
Agreed. And as trade associations, we need to make sure that our literature, our documentation is compliant with the code.
True.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that becomes very relevant and very important if we're taking our organizations forward. We get behind the code, we're promoting the code because we believe in it, clearly. Well, then we have to follow that all the way through. And as I think Nigel said there, it may take some time. We can't at this moment in time put a time limit on it, but it clearly is the direction of travel for those taking a responsible position within this industry. And we have to move forward on this issue without a shadow of a doubt.
Okay.
I don't know if there are any more questions. Sarah, can you see any on your side? I can maybe move to the conclusions if that's okay with everybody.
Move to the conclusions.
Okay, listen, so there we have it. We've attempted today to give you background to the new CCPI, the reasons stemming from the Grenfell Tower tragedy. The government then clearly appointed Dame Judith Hackett, and then government commitment to accept all of her review recommendations. And indeed, these included the appointment of a building safety regulator, a new legislation brought forward recently through the Building Safety Bill to provide the regulatory framework. The industry responds through the working group structure, including Working Group 12, and then the MIG, from which the CCPI was developed, to address specifically a recommendation on construction product information communication that Hackett made. So that was the turning point and the catalyst that really started to drive the need for such a code. So Sarah's taken the time to take us through the issues with examples of ambiguous and disingenuous marketing that the CCPI hopes to eradicate. Hackett, in her recommendation, stated that testing scope, applications of products and systems, and the resulting implications must be more clearly communicated in plain, consistent, non-technical language. And as we've said through here, that technical departments as well as sales and marketing departments, very importantly of a manufacturer's organization, would all need to be involved in ensuring that the information in your documentation is clear, accurate, up-to-date, accessible, and unambiguous. That's what the new code insists on. And it's not just your written information. Let's get that point across as well. It's your communications across the board when you're speaking with architects, when you're providing information on site, etc. It's critical that the code is to be followed in those areas, and that's what Hackett was alluding to. Matthew's taken the time to take us through all the 11 clauses of the CCPI and spent some time discussing many aspects in detail. He's given us specific examples of what is meant by the different clauses, hopefully assisting our understanding. He's also gone through the different types of standards, differentiating between the various ones that we will come across or the various ones we see on a day-to-day basis, but perhaps don't know, the way that they lie. And it's important to what he carried on to do, I should say, is that he drew attention on how they related to the CCPI, and that's very important. The difference between certification and classification was also highlighted again with specific examples. Finally, as I get to the end, this workshop is one of two that we will present to our members. The first one focused on the background need and development of the CCPI with explanation of the 11 clauses, examples of marketing and communication issues. The next workshop that the LRWA and SPRA will run will be in the first quarter of 2022 and will focus on the implementation of the CCPI. This will look at what is required by an organization to sign up and go through the process of achieving the code. We will keep you fully informed regarding the date and registration for that event, obviously. So we hope you found this workshop useful and informative. And again, on behalf of SPRA and LRWA, Sarah, Matthew, myself, and indeed people who posed questions to us, we thank you for attending this morning. A final reminder that these slides will be available on both the association's websites in the near future. Thank you once again, and good morning. Thank you.